dark.
Yeah, that's pretty dark.
We'll just turn them all back on again.
Yep. There we go. That's better.
All right. Well, welcome and thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Amy Etchison and I'm Director of SIU Press. Before I introduce our speakers, I just want to tell you a little bit about how this evening will work, what you can expect tonight. So first of all, we're going to have a book talk, and that'll start in just a few minutes. And then after this portion of the program concludes, we'll make our way out into the rotunda, and the SIU bookstore will be there selling books. So if you don't have a copy of the book yet, you can buy one after this. And then Carl and Dr. Poshard will be in the rotunda as well to sign copies of the books. And there will be food and wine. So please stick around for that. I also wanted to mention that tonight's event is co-sponsored by SIU Press and Morris Library. And I wanted to thank Dean Politz especially for his support of SIU Press and all the books that we publish. So let me introduce our speakers this evening. They are the co-authors of The Son of Southern Illinois, Glenn Poshard's Life in Politics and Education. And we just recently learned that this book will be honored at the ISHS Awards ceremony this coming spring. So we won't know which award the book is getting, we just know it is being awarded somehow. So when we attend that ceremony this coming spring, we'll find out what award the book is getting, but it will be honored. So Carl Walworth worked for 31 years as a reporter, editor, and later publisher in the newspaper industry in Illinois. He's currently the library director at the Mattoon Public Library. He's the author of The Mayor of Moultrie Avenue and a researcher for Lake Sarah, the hidden jewel in America's heartland. Walworth has a bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Illinois in Urbana and an MBA from Nova Southeastern University. And Carl will be talking this evening about his collaboration with Dr. Poshard and the process of writing this book. Dr. Poshard, who hardly needs an introduction to this crowd, he has been at the forefront of educational and economic development initiatives at the regional, state, and national level for more than 5 decades. His lengthy service-oriented career has included time as a soldier, teacher, Illinois State Senator, a member of the U.S. Congress, chairman of the Southern Illinois University Board of Trustees, and president of the SIU system. The Poshard Foundation for Abused Children, a volunteer organization founded by Poshard and his wife Jo, has served the needs of vulnerable children in Southern Illinois for nearly 25 years. This evening, Dr. Poshard will share stories from the book, which essentially is stories from his life. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Carl Walworth.
Thank you so much for coming out. It's great to be here with Glenn and Jo and the opportunity to discuss Son of Southern Illinois, Glenn Poshard's life in politics and education. A book that has many connections, both to Southern Illinois, the region you all love, and the Carbondale campus where we are tonight. Many connections throughout this book. The book came together in, there are multiple ways that this came together. One was the review of about 8 banker's boxes of items that Glenn collected throughout the various things that he did in his life. Memos, campaign documents, scrapbooks, newspaper clippings, some kind of inside baseball stuff, but a lot of things that you just might expect someone to keep and cherish as they go along. And so that's one way that we put together this book. A second way that we put together the book was to physically go to locations that you'll find in the book. We spent a full day in Herald and White County in the Carmi area. Met with his family. We had a great visit with one of his high school teachers. We went to a lot of the places that are described in some of the early chapters. And so we physically got to look and observe and see what they're like today, as he would describe what they were like when he was growing up. Another personal way to do it was a few years ago, Glenn and Joe organized some peaceful marches around the congressional district where he served. I didn't go to all of them. I went to a few of them, which is a way to observe how they interacted with constituents and to get a first-hand idea of how they, of why they were so successful in the roles that they served. I reviewed things in the Morris Library archives, just down the hallway here. And there are about 20, more than 20 actually, personal interviews with people who work closely with the Congressman, President Emeritus Poshard. Some in person, some over the phone, a few email exchanges, but those were enlightening, and those are also reflected in this work. Through the process, as you might imagine, several people were invited, not several, but a few, some key people were invited to review sections and to provide feedback, which is much appreciated. They all made it better. And as a writer, editor, that's what you want, is for them to make it better. So I'm appreciative of that. I'm appreciative of Amy and her staff at the SIU Press for the way that they handled, bringing together the design, the final editing, and now the promotion of this book. Very appreciative of their hard work that they do in the many titles that they publish, but in particular this one, I'm proud of their effort and appreciate their professionalism. So we encourage questions after Dr. Poshard speaks. We'll have a little discussion. I'm going to say just a couple things about the book. It does start in White County, where Glenn grew up. There's a story in the book about how he came with his father to SIU. The first time he did his class registration, he participated in the Woody Hall Shuffle, which some of you may be familiar with. I understand there no longer is a Woody Hall Shuffle. But his dad, Glenn was the first in his family to have this experience to complete a university education. So that was a special moment. As you might imagine, the life that he had in White County was different than the life that was ahead of him. And in a lot of ways, the SIU experience was critical to that transition, which he may talk about, I may talk about just a little bit. The GI Bill was instrumental in him being able to afford an education at SIU. Chapter 22, I'm going to talk about for just a minute. Late in his tenure as the president of SIU, he spoke to the Civic Club in downtown Chicago. And the tape or the talk is still out there if you want to see it. It's 35 minutes. But he talked about accessibility and affordability of higher education. And chapter 22 summarizes that talk and in a lot of ways feelings about the importance of making education like you get in SIUC available very broadly and even to the poorest and the most in need. The chapter cites President Lincoln when he signed the Morrill Act in 1862, that opened doors to the sons and daughters of the middle classes, the farmer, the miner, the factory worker, and thousands of families who otherwise would be shut out of the process. And so that's explained in that chapter, his father's education and the way that he grew as a person. Then the other thing that I hope you take from that chapter and other chapters are the way that SIU in Southern Illinois shaped his character and the way that he thinks and why he's so passionate about people, about campus, about all the things that he's done. He just showed me down the hall some of the plaques on the wall down here that recognize not himself, but they recognize some of the key people that he served with. And that's the kind of thing that you find throughout his career. Also down the hall, there's some words along the lines of, at SIU, you learn how to think, not what to think. And so those are the kinds of things that come from the SIU chapters and that experience. So I'm going to close with, from that, the last chapter of the book talks about the Poshard Foundation for abused and neglected children, now in its 25th year. That foundation came out of the day after the gubernatorial election. Glenn and Joe sitting down and saying, what's important to us? What's next? They didn't tarry about losing the election. It's what is next. And what was next was the Poshard Foundation for Abused and Neglected Children. Yes, there was time still to serve as Vice Chancellor. There was time to be president of the SIU system and of the Board of Trustees. But that foundation has helped thousands of children, people who've had a piece of life dealt to them that you would rather they not be dealt. And that was what their focus was going to be. That's the kind of thinking that comes from the kind of education that you get at SIU. I'm going to read just one little chapter, and then I'm going to bring up Dr. Poshard. Not chapter, I'm sorry. This is from chapter 22. And it goes to the experience of a college education and the experience that he had and how that impacted him through his career. The college and university setting is where we learn how to be good citizens in a democracy. Here we are exposed to people of different ethnic, religious, and racial backgrounds. We meet people from different social and economic backgrounds. We learn to appreciate the differences, the diversity. Here's where we truly learn to get along with one another, despite our differences. When we leave the university and take a job somewhere, the people we work with, the people who live next door to us, in all likelihood, are going to reflect that diversity. And we will have been prepared at the university for the requirements that good citizenship demands to be a contributing member of a pluralistic, democratic society. So those were the words that come from that chapter. I think they very much reflect some of the ideas about SIU. And with no further ado, Dr. Poshard.
And that last thing that Carl read, the folks who say today that we don't need a college education for our kids, they forget that part of a college education, that it prepares us for citizenship, not just the skills to get a job. So, thank you folks for being here, really appreciate it. My wife Jo is here somewhere, honey, I'm not sure where you're sitting. Oh, okay, over there. Anyway, the front of the book is a photograph of me at the polling place in the little village of Harold, Illinois. It still has 22 people living there. And that's the polling place where my dad was Democrat precinct committeeman for all the years. And I'm sure I was 3 or 4 years old when I started making the rounds of our rural precinct with him. And every election night was spent right there. It's a old cinder block building, and there's the outhouse is still standing out back. So anyway, I'll share a few things out of the book with you, if I may. I grew up in southern White County in what was called the Hill Country, very poor area. And I'll just give you a kind of a snippet of my upbringing. My mom and dad only had third-grade educations, and we lived way out in the hills, isolated from everybody, but family and friends out there. Glenn's mother made her own bonnets from cracker boxes and cloth. We got our flour in 25-pound cloth bags. When the flour was gone, Mom would wash the bags, cut them down to the right size, and on her old pedal-driven Singer sewing machine, she would make beautiful bonnets, sewing pockets along the front where she would insert cardboard strips from empty cracker boxes so that the bill protected her face completely from the hot sun. Nothing was ever wasted in our household. She hauled water from the spring, prepared food, cleaned the house daily, embroidered pillows, made quilts. She loved poetry. A a love she passed on to me. Her cursive written notes on a pocket-sized family Bible are a special, enduring family treasure. She also tended the garden, planting, weeding, and then harvesting fresh vegetables. Of all the siblings, Glenn was the only one who helped in the garden. Years later, he fondly remembered the experiences and his mother this way. Leaves from the pin oak falling softly across the lawn, a full moon coming up slowly over the pond. Memories of you even now. At this time of the year, planting the garden would have been first on our agenda. Long rows of tomatoes and green beans and onions and potatoes. You in your sunbonnet and long dress, bending over the garden hoe, me placing the potato slips in the mounds, bareheaded and shirtless in the sun, hands and knees in the mud. Day after day of hoeing and weeding and watering, waiting patiently for our spring ritual to begin. At 6 in the morning, we would walk in the garden, the sun coming up, and pick 2 red ripened tomatoes, still cool from the morning dew. We'd sit on the edge of the porch, salt shakers in hand, enjoying the fruits of our garden, greeting the morning sun, talking about the Sunday school lesson at the Chapman's Grove General Baptist Church. A few Christmases ago at the family gathering, Madeline, Ed, and I asked the same question. What did we remember most about you? Rattling pans at 4:30 in the morning to get Dad off to work and herding us all off to church on Sunday was easy. But I was the only one who remembered the garden because it was just for me, your own special gift to me. And sitting here on the porch, listening to the chorus of crickets in the woods along the pond, I miss you, and the moon and the pin oak miss you too. So, kind of a little insight into my upbringing and my mother, who I loved dearly. Always told everybody we were the most church kids in White County. Mom had us in church on Wednesday night, Saturday night, Sunday, and Sunday night, and there was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You went. And so that's kind of how I remember my mother. I went to the Army right out of high school because that was the only thing open to kids where I grew up. No one had any money to go to college, and there were no jobs. So let me find this next place that I wanted to read you. I was sent to Korea with the 1st Cav Infantry Division, and while I was there, I was right up on the DMZ, and when we got any extra time, me and some of my buddies would catch an old deuce-and-a-half truck going down the main supply route, and there was an orphanage of children down there, many of them orphans of American servicemen and Korean women, and this was 10 years after the war. They were outcasts in that society, and we would stand in the pay line at the end of the month and take $1 from each guy in the outfit, and we would buy stuff for these kids down at the orphanage and take them down there and celebrate. We gave them birthdays because nobody knew their birthday or anything. But anyway, I was just devastated when I left Korea because I knew I'd never see these kids again. They just grabbed at my heart. I remember getting on the plane and literally in tears, knowing I'd never see these kids again. And I was still only 19 years old. I'd gone to the Army on my 17th birthday. Years later, when he was president of Southern Illinois University, he regularly perused other university magazines in the hopes of picking up some new best practices for his alma mater. He came across an article about Jenny Roby, a professor at Brigham Young University. Professor Roby was an internationally acclaimed authority on child abuse, neglect, and abandonment. As he read the story of her life, a single paragraph caught his attention. She had been an orphan in the Songjuk orphanage during the time he had served in Korea. He immediately picked up the phone and called her at Brigham Young University. "Yes, I remember the soldiers," she told Poshard, adding, "I'd like to do something to pay them back." "Would you come and spend a day at our university?" he replied. In February of 2014, she did, telling her story to Southern Illinois University students and faculty. She explained that she had been adopted by Mormon missionaries who had visited the orphanage and brought her to Utah, where she grew up and followed her dream to help abandoned children around the world. Poshard gave her copies of photos. Roby said those were the only pictures her friends in the orphanage would have of that period of their lives. For Poshard, it provided perspective. It took God 50 years to reveal to me the good that came out of all of that poverty and pain I was witnessed in that orphanage. Now she's making a difference for hundreds of thousands of children all over the world. The life lesson to him is this: you have to look at your contributions in the world as things you may never find out about. You're lucky if you see a small part of what you did come to fruition in the lives of others. We should never demand payoff for what we see and do now. To mature in faith, we have to understand it's enough just to give the gift. I did see what me and those other soldiers did come to fruition. I was lucky. 50 years later, isn't that something? Here's one of those orphans in that orphanage who became an international authority on child abuse, neglect, and abandonment, and goes all over the globe to third world nations where there are civil wars, abandonment of children, and so on, and teaches governments how to care for these children. So, never know. Okay. I'm going to skip that one. I don't know how much time we really have here. Let's see. 24. Okay. When I became Vice Chancellor for Administration here, Dr. John Jackson was the interim chancellor at that time. And Dr. Jackson pulled me aside one day and said, "You know what, the campus is falling apart. We haven't had any renovation of this campus since Dr. Morris, and we need to do something about it." And so, as Vice Chancellor for Administration, I made a list of about 12 people, which Dr. Jackson sort of referenced to me, and we put together a committee. And we started meetings all over campus and out in Carbondale and so on about what the needs were for the campus. And I'll share a little bit of that with you. From the time Interim Chancellor John Jackson saw the need and instructed me to put a plan together in 2001, we found a way to get the funding to build a new student health center, complete the beautiful Morris Library, build a transportation education center, a new student services building, new athletic facilities, new residence halls, upgrade our technology, and receive startup funding for a new $80 million communication building for which the final construction funds are waiting to be released. The land use plan was a central focus and a labor of love for me, Poshard said, for which I will always be grateful. But I was only one member of the team. This plan was Dr. Jackson's vision from the beginning and should be recognized as a part of his legacy to the university. Later, after I retired the first time and then came back as chairman of the board of trustees and then picked to be president of the university, I never let that plan die because it was so important to this university. And almost all of it has been completed now. and I think helped the university tremendously as we went along. Jackson, after his retirement from SIU, is now a visiting professor in the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute. Glenn's proud of that plan. I'm proud of it too. There hadn't been one since the Dwight Morris. Most of the things have either come true or are still viable possibilities. The land use plan was a strategic plan, an aspiration, Jackson said. After careful and inclusive consultation on campus, it then had to be implemented. Poshard and others like Phil Gatton, the head of the physical plant, were able to turn the plan into concrete bricks and mortar buildings and grounds, and it all took money, lots of money. The money required effective politics to obtain the funds. That took a careful and compelling presentation of the university's case in Springfield and Washington, which Poshard did persuasively and often. As an undergraduate and later a graduate student, and then during his long tenure at a variety of increasingly important offices, Poshard was able to see the university and its evolution from a unique perspective. It was a key part of the vision for the Carbondale campus, which he helped to make a reality. I'm patting myself on the back a little bit. I hope you'll forgive me. That plan was really important to all of us, and it still is. And I give Dr. Jackson all the praise because he initiated it, he trusted me to put the people together, and he trusted me to go to Springfield and Washington and get the funds for it. I'll read you about the most painful experience I've ever had in my life, at least one of them. Sort of confining this to the university, because I was accused of plagiarism as the president of the university. And I'll sort of explain that whole thing to you. When I was president, there was an assistant professor on the SIU Edwardsville campus named Dussault. Mr. Dussault, or Professor Dussault, came up for promotion to associate professor. And in the course of turning in his papers to be promoted, he copied verbatim a single-spaced document that he found online from a professor out east. And it was about 4 pages long, so it wasn't insignificant at all. The dean of his school caught this, and along with some other things that they considered with respect to Professor Dussault, they let him go. And the provost and the chancellor backed up the dean in doing that. It was brought to my attention to assist him. I chose not to interfere. That's a campus academic decision. It wasn't mine as the president of the system. And I backed the chancellor. And then this gentleman's friends decided to go underground. No one knew who they were, but they became a group of people who then went after the chancellors on both campuses. They accused Chancellor Vandegrift at Edwardsville of plagiarism because they said he copied a part of Dr. Martin Luther King's speech when he gave a speech on Dr. Martin Luther King Day. We looked at that and considered it, and there was nothing there. It was a reference to something Dr. King had said, certainly, but there's no intention to copy a part of his speech. So I backed Dr. Vandegrift. I did not choose to fire him as they wanted me to. So then they came after Dr. Wendler on this campus. And Dr. Wendler had written up the SIU 150 plan when he came on as chancellor here, which was a good plan. But they said he copied it from Texas A&M where he had been before. I put together a committee that was headed up by Mike Lawrence, who was head of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute at that time, and I think 4 other people, I guess. And they came back and told me after deliberations and investigation that Dr. Wendler did not commit plagiarism, but that there was some, I think they termed it intellectual dishonesty in some of the things that were transposed to our plan here, but it wasn't anything significant enough to consider firing him or even doing anything to him. And that really upset them because I would not charge Dr. Wendler with anything. And so there was a professor on campus here who had come to me with her husband early on when I was Vice Chancellor of Administration and presented a case to me that she was being mobbed by her cohorts in her department. I had never heard of mobbing before. It was something new to me, but I was Vice Chancellor for Administration. That wasn't part of my business. That was a provost and chancellor issue, and I would not take action on their behalf to make some case against the department. So, so that had not set well with the professor, and in time, she joined this underground group from Edwardsville and became a whole part of this retribution scheme. The General Counsel's office called me up one day and said, we got a report from some people that were at a faculty party last night, and this particular professor and her husband were telling everybody that something big was about to come down on President Poshard. So I was over in the communication building doing an interview with WSIU. I came upstairs and the two kids from the Daily Egyptian grabbed me and accused me of plagiarism. And anyway, this was so disheartening to me because I hadn't read my dissertation in over 25 years and I didn't even know what they were talking about. But they laid out all this stuff that the lawyer here in Carbondale, I had represented this particular professor several times in lawsuits against the university. He had taken up for her in this case of plagiarism and brought my dissertation to the Daily Egyptian, pointing out all of these things that were wrong. I was stunned. And this went on for a number of weeks, and I finally got my chance to appear before a faculty or research committee of 9 people. And in the process of preparing myself for that, I'd gone to the archives, and there were 13 dissertations that had been written at the very same time I wrote my dissertation in the very same college, and they all used the same style of attribution and everything that I used. And I took those 13 dissertations with me before the committee. And they did not find me guilty of intentional plagiarism, but there had been some hearings before where the kind of style that I used was, and what happened to me through the process, they had to label it inadvertent plagiarism, meaning it was non-intentional. So that really killed me, but I accepted it and went on. And then suddenly, there was a box that appeared at my office at Stone Center of 2 big boxes, actually. One had actually been brought to Mike Lawrence. The other came to the Stone Center to me. And the professor here that had joined with the underground group at Edwardsville had written to the Southern Illinois in a letter saying that they had found over 100 other incidents of plagiarism among the professorial community at SIU, Carbondale, and Edwardsville. So this was really tragic because all of this was an inquisition against other people just because this group was angry that they didn't get their way about everything. And You know, I gathered my administrative staff and we looked at everyone. There was 113 of them. And had we done what they wanted us to do, some of these were like 130-page dissertations with one line that they claimed was plagiarized. And had we done what they wanted us to do, I don't know that the university could have really survived with the attention it would have gotten, all for no good reason, and all out of spite and retribution, with its genesis in this one professor that was fired at Edwardsville. So I did what I thought I had to do as an administrator. I shredded every one of them. I was not going to accuse 113 people on this campus of plagiarizing. I was not going to do it because it was all born out of anger and retribution, and it was ridiculous. And that's what I did. But, you know, maybe I can take criticism on that, but I can tell you this, in the process of defending myself, we went to another university of a higher stature than we are actually, and went through archives and found several dissertations with the same attribution style that I had used in mine. So, you know, so I'm going to read something to you here. This was the most painful experience of my professional life. I had been in the public arena for decades and was accustomed to making difficult decisions that brought intense criticism. I had learned to handle it as part of the price of holding public office, but this was different. In all those years, I had never been accused of taking credit for someone else's work, never been accused of trying to deceive the public. I went before the university and took full responsibility for my work and my mistakes. I wasn't angry at anyone, not the underground faculty, not the daily Egyptian reporters, no one. But I was overcome with sadness. I thought of the first day I walked onto this campus, January 3rd, 1966. I had just spent 3 years in the U.S. Army. I had recently turned 20, and I was now the first in my family going to my favorite university. I had a job as a student worker in the physical plant, and it was already dark when I got off work and walked across the campus to the upstairs bedroom I rented in a small house on College Street. I could remember that walk like it was yesterday. Past the stately old Baptist Union, the Pulliam Hall clock tower silhouetted against the full moon, shining down on the grassy knoll now covered with snow. The sheer exhilaration I felt at being alive at that moment. So lucky, so blessed. In 2007, over 40 years had passed since then, and all the intervening years, I thought of the love SIU had poured into me and the love I had tried to return to her. My failings seemed so small compared to this love affair that I have carried all my life with my alma mater. Irony of ironies. Love gives and love takes away. We're outside of some family tragedies that have happened in my life. That was the worst time of my life. I knew I had not intentionally done anything wrong. I had used what my dissertation committee had approved as my attribution style back then, 40 years before the accusation, and it really hurt. It really hurt. I'm going to read just a little more to you. Let me find this. Okay. One of my closest friends in Congress was a gentleman named John Lewis. Poshard recalls his friendship with Lewis. John was elected to Congress in 1986. I was elected in 1988. Not long after my swearing in from the 22nd Congressional District of Illinois, I met Congressman Lewis for the first time. It was 6 a.m. on a Wednesday morning in the House gym. Over the 10 years I served in Congress, our little group of congressmen, Pete DeFazio of Oregon, Dick Durbin and I from Illinois, and John Lewis from Georgia, met as many times in the House gym at 6 a.m. Tuesday through Thursday as our schedules allowed. It was usually 20 minutes on the treadmill, 10 minutes on the weights, shower, dress, and walk back to our office. John talks about our little group in his biography, Walking with the Wind. Since John's office and mine were fairly close to one another, we often walked together. In that hour each day, I never once saw the civil rights icon or the sought-after national leader. What I did see was a personification of kindness and calmness. John never brought up the demonstrations or marches he had led, never anything about Dr. King or other civil rights leaders. We seldom ever talked about those things except perhaps as the issue related to legislation currently pending before us in Congress. John and I shared a common background of growing up in rural poverty, of believing that government could be a force for good. We shared a common love for the powerful principles of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. We had many conversations about our families and the small rural churches that were such an important part of our upbringing. We shared the scriptures that we learned from our mothers, and we talked often about Dr. King's beloved community, a vision John never gave up on his whole life. John became an important leader in our Faith and Politics Institute, which was formed in my office with some people that I had met at the inauguration dinner when I first became a congressman. We began meeting in my office at 7 o'clock every Wednesday morning, and simply starting out with both people were civil rights activists in South America and Methodist ministers, and the other lady was a personal assistant to Hillary Clinton. We began meeting in my office, and out of those meetings came what we call the Faith and Politics Institute in Washington, D.C. And it is today the foremost institute in Washington, D.C., with a bipartisan approach to its existence. And we started on the principle that the scriptures say that we are to give unto the Lord what is the Lord, and give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. And we said, how can we do this? Washington is the seat of power in the whole world. It represents everything Caesar represents. So how do we handle our personal faith in this place where power and position and authority and wealth and everything else are the gods? And so every Wednesday morning, that's what we talked about. And out of that came the Faith and Politics Institute. John Lewis became an important part of that. Who better than my friend John to help us understand the dynamic relationship between faith and politics? There was a reason he was called the conscience of the Congress. His conscience manifested itself as courage and kindness, and will always be a beacon to all Americans who care about justice. That's the marches that Carl talked about a while ago. When John passed away a few years ago, Joe and I went to all 39 counties that I had represented in Congress, and we marched around every courthouse for nonviolence, which was John's main issue. We did it in his memory, and spent so many wonderful moments with him. I'm going to read you one more chapter that's a page and a half, and I'll quit. How am I doing on time, Amy? Am I okay? Do I have just another 5 minutes? Well, I'll take it anyway. Okay, this chapter is very small. It's called The Shadow Side of Leadership. Finding common ground is central to Poshard's legislative approach. The ability to find common ground begins with developing respectful relationships. Poshard has, had, and has an extraordinary number of relationships. Have breakfast with him on a Sunday at Bob Evans and Marion and count the people who personally and respectfully speak with him. Meaningful relationships are a foundational part of his public and private life. Poshard's son Dennis recently reminded his father of an example of the kind of thinking our world could use more of, thinking that embraces a respectful, inclusive approach. When he was 18 years old, Dennis went to Springfield with me to spend a few days in the Illinois State Senate. He said the most fun he had all week was the ride we shared with Senator Ralph Dunn. He sat in the back seat and listened to Ralph and me discuss issues before the Senate, trade stories about our colleagues, and laugh about our travails with certain constituents. Ralph and I occasionally rode up and back with each other and depended on our friendship and goodwill to fairly represent Southern Illinois. Ralph, of course, was a Republican, and I am a Democrat. Sometimes we differed only slightly on an issue, and at other times the gulf was wider between us. But through respect for each other and an honest desire to understand the other's position, many times we narrowed that gap. My son asked me a question. Dad, how did we get from where you and Ralph were to today? I didn't have an answer. Maybe it's not as complicated as it may seem. Loss of respect and goodwill doesn't happen overnight. There's a gradual erosion. Maybe it begins with the notion that life is only about wins and losses. So whatever it takes to win is most important. The end justifies the means. So we don't have to see the other side. We don't have to compromise. And the chasm grows between us. Maybe our fear of public failure or criticism means we don't have the courage to be imperfect. So we present a false image of perfection and strength, making it difficult to see others as anything but weak, masking our own sense of cowardice. Maybe our intolerance of differences makes enemies of other races, religions, ethnicities, or sexual orientations, so judgment becomes more important than mercy or compassion. Maybe our sense of self-preservation is so great it prevents us from caring about preserving the life or integrity of others. Parker Palmer, one of America's great leaders in higher education, defined a leader this way: a person who has an unusual degree of power to project on other people his or her shadow or his or her light. And this power creates the conditions under which other people must live and move and have their being. Conditions which can be illuminating and uplifting to the people, or conditions which can cast them into total darkness. When we believe that winning by any means is all that counts, that others' preservation is not important, that intolerance and judgment are more conducive to the success of our democracy than respect and goodwill, then we will have failed our children and our country. I have witnessed too many times the shadow side of leadership cast people into darkness, and have spoken out as forcefully as I could. But without eternal vigilance by the people, the darkness wins. So, thank you. Do we have time for some
I
questions?
think we have some time for questions.
Anybody have any questions that we can answer? Yes, sir.
When you guys started the book, how long did it take you to finish the book?
Carl?
It was about 5 years. It was long, but it wasn't a direct path over 5 years. It's probably more detail than you want, but I wasn't employed when I started, and I got employed, and that set me back, and then there were some health issues that came up, and so we kind of started and stopped a little bit. But the short answer to your question is about 5 years.
5 years. Any other questions? I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Can you touch briefly on the start of the foundation 25 years ago?
We can't, I will. I had lost the race for governor to George Ryan, and we got up the next morning and sat down at the breakfast table, and Joe and I aren't one to sort of look back and think about the past a lot, and we just said, okay, what's our next step here? And through the campaign for governor all over the state, inevitably when I would hold a town meeting in the various counties, people would get up and say to me, well, if you become governor, what are you going to do about all these abused kids all over the place? You know? And I wasn't aware of this. And it wasn't indigenous to one community. It was everywhere we spoke, every place. And so the next morning over breakfast, we began talking and considering what we wanted to do. And the thing that we came up with was we wanted to help those children. And so we formed the foundation. Johnny Logan College was nice enough to domicile us there. And we've been there 25 years this year, and you are all welcome to come on September the 7th to our 25th anniversary. It's just going to be a big barbecue right there on the grounds of Johnny Logan. But, you know, thankfully, we've been able to help thousands of children over those 25 years, and we're very grateful that we've been given that opportunity. It's kind of our passion for getting up in the morning at our age, you know. But that's how it started. It was just, what's our next step? Yeah. Anything else? Okay. Well, I guess we can, if anybody wants a book, we'll be out there and we can sign them. All right. Thank you.